Hey guys, tonight we slip into a world where the water moves so slowly it feels like it's half asleep. Somewhere just outside ancient Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital built in the middle of a shimmering lake. You stand at the edge of a quiet canal at dawn, and the mist is rising in lazy curls as if even the fog hasn't had its morning cocoa yet. A canoe drifts past without making a sound, and the farmer inside barely glances at you, probably thinking, "You definitely won't survive a day out here," which, to be fair, is absolutely correct. These wetlands were calm, yes, but also full of mud strong enough to steal your shoes and eels bold enough to steal your dignity. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You take your first step onto the wooden landing platform, and it gives a gentle creak, as if whispering, "Careful. We've seen things." The air is cool and wet, hugging your skin like a sleepy dog that doesn't know its own weight. Somewhere far across the lake, a heron cries out, a long echoing note that sounds like someone complaining about the weather before coffee. In front of you lies the Chinampa Zone, those famous floating gardens that aren't actually floating. A mainstream historical fact slides into place. Chinampas weren't rafts or lily pad platforms. They were carefully constructed farmland plots built on top of shallow lake beds, so stable they barely moved at all. The Aztecs designed them by layering mud, reeds, and sediment until each island stood firm, producing some of the richest soil in the Americas. But right now, at sunrise, everything still looks like magic. Thin lines of mist cling to the gardens, drifting across the canals like ghostly laundry somebody forgot to take in. The first farmers of the day paddle through the water with that calm, practiced rhythm that instantly makes you feel uncoordinated. Their canoes glide so smoothly it looks fake, like someone set the world's motion speed to 0.75x. You step onto the first chinampa, and the ground surprises you. It's firm but soft underneath, almost like a saturated sponge pretending to be a meadow. A fringe tidbit floats into your mind. Some early European visitors refused to believe the islands weren't floating rafts, so the Aztecs had to physically chop into the soil to prove the point. Even then, scholars still argue whether the earliest Chinampas in older lake systems did move slightly before being stabilized with willows. The truth is probably complicated, much like everything humans invent. A farmer nearby pushes his canoe against the shore, hops off, and begins checking his squash, plants with a kind of tenderness you reserve for expensive electronics. His clothes smell faintly of lake water, wood smoke, and that clean, earthy scent we modern people like to pretend comes from 8 candles. He nods politely, then returns to his routine, humming a tune that sounds older than the lake itself. You wander farther down the narrow garden path. On either side, wooden stakes rise like thin ribs, marking boundaries between plots. These chinampas stretch in perfect rectangles, long and narrow, like green carpets laid carefully across the water. Birds hop along the edges of the canals, flicking their wings at you, tiny feathered employees arriving early to work. In the distance, the sun begins to push through the fog, turning the entire wetland gold. It's so peaceful, you almost forget that these gardens fed one of the largest cities on Earth at the time. Tenochtitlan needed mountains of food: corn, beans, squash, chilies, the good stuff. and chinampas delivered. Literally, by canoe. You crouch and drag your fingers across the soil. It's cool, spongy, clean, and you can tell this place isn't just farmland. It's memory. Layers of mud and family labor and countless sunrises rolled together like a soft, wet version of history lasagna. A light breeze brushes your cheek, carrying the smell of water hyacinth and distant cooking fires. You exhale slowly. Yeah, this is the kind of place that turns even the noisiest brain into a quiet one. A nearby canoe bumps gently against the garden wall, and the farmer inside laughs to himself as if the canoe told a joke. Maybe it did. Maybe it's complaining about how many vegetables it carried yesterday. You keep walking until the fog thins a little more. Now the gardens look like enormous chessboards arranged across the lake. But instead of pawns and rooks, they're filled with cornstalks, beans twisting up reed poles, amaranth nodding heavy with seeds. And suddenly you get it. This landscape is slow by design, slow to build, slow to change, slow to disturb. Winter or summer, sunrise or dusk, these gardens barely budge. And you're just beginning to understand why they mattered so deeply. You follow a narrow path along the edge of the Chinampa, the damp earth brushing against your sandals, as if testing whether you deserve to be here. Morning light slowly tints the canals amber, and the mist begins to lift in gentle spirals, revealing the quiet choreography of the Aztec farmers preparing for the day. You can hear paddles dipping into the water, slow, steady, almost meditative, and it gives the whole place the vibe of a yoga retreat, except with more mud and significantly more corn. A canoe glides toward you carrying bundles of reeds, baskets of compost, and one very unimpressed-looking duck. The farmer paddling it nods at you. His calloused hands move with that effortless confidence of someone who could do this in complete darkness, and probably has. He smells faintly of lake water, warm soil, and the kind of clean sweat that says, "I've been awake since 4 a.m. and you have not." He grounds his canoe against the side of the Chinampa and begins unloading his materials. You watch as he kneels, presses his palm to the soil, and nods like he's greeting an old friend. This is his plot. Rectangular, long as a small house, hugged on both sides by canals that sparkle like liquid gold. The Aztecs built these gardens so efficiently that one mainstream historical fact stands out. Chinampas could yield up to 7 harvest cycles per year. 7. Meanwhile, you're proud of yourself when you manage to keep one houseplant alive for 2 months. The farmer begins layering fresh mud along the edge of the plot. This is part of the upkeep. Every few weeks, they pull nutrient-rich muck from the canals and spread it across the garden's surface, like the world's most effective and squishiest fertilizer. You crouch to help, your hands disappearing into the cool ooze, and suddenly you understand why the system works so well. The lake constantly renewed the soil. Nothing wasted, everything recycled. The ultimate ancient composting system, minus the Instagram posts. A fringe tidbit drifts into your mind. Early Spanish chroniclers were so confused by chinampas that some insisted the gardens must float on secret wooden frames. Others claimed the Aztecs used invisible supports, which is historian speak for, "We have no idea what's happening here, but it's definitely sorcery." And even today, scholars still argue whether the very first chinampas began as literal floating mats of woven reeds before becoming the more stable version you're standing on. The truth is somewhere between engineering genius and ecological intuition. As the farmer works, you notice something growing tall and straight along the corners of every plot. Willow trees, ahuejotes. Their roots anchor the chinampas like natural staples, preventing erosion and keeping the islands from drifting. Not that they drift much anyway. These things are about as mobile as a stubborn sofa. You move along the edge and pause at a wooden walkway, bridging two plots. It's narrow, wobbly, and has exactly the same energy as the phrase, "Trust me, you'll be fine." Still, you step onto it, balancing carefully, arms out like a baby learning to walk. Below you, the canal ripples softly, reflecting the sky and the green leafy geometry of the gardens. A canoe full of teens paddles past, laughing at something, probably you. They're carrying seedlings, tools, and what looks like a lunch wrapped in corn husks. One of them calls out something in Nahuatl that you don't understand, but judging by his grin, it was probably friendly. Or teasing. Hard to tell. You reach the next chinampa, where two older farmers are already working with tools shaped by centuries of tradition. A wooden digging stick punches through the soil with a satisfying thunk. A stone-bladed hoe scrapes in steady arcs. Everything they do looks slow, but not lazy. More like they're in sync with the land, the water, and the morning itself. The air grows warmer as the sun rises higher, and the scent of damp earth fills your lungs. It's grounding, calming. You can almost feel your thoughts settling like silt after a storm. One farmer gestures for you to help plant young corn shoots. You kneel, press your fingers into the soil, and gently tuck one green sprout into its new home. The farmer nods approvingly, which feels like winning a small, wholesome award. "Careful," he mutters, patting the soil around the sprout's roots. They remember how you treat them. You decide not to ask whether he means that literally. Between the chinampas, the water sits so still it's like a mirror, reflecting clouds, willow branches, and your very confused expression. Occasionally, a dragonfly skims across the surface, drawing a perfect ripple circle before zipping away like a tiny aerial acrobat. As you continue down the garden rows, the path widens. Other workers join in the morning rhythm, some hauling reeds, others scooping mud, others checking irrigation channels. Everything is precise, organized, purposeful. And something clicks inside you. Those gardens didn't survive for centuries because they floated. They survived because people tended them with patience, routine, and deep-rooted knowledge of their environment. Chinampas hardly moved because the people caring for them moved carefully, deliberately, in harmony with the land beneath their feet. The sun climbs a little higher. The water glistens. The gardens breathe. And you walk deeper into the green quiet. You step farther along the soft canal bank, the mist thinning around you like someone slowly lifting a silk curtain. The young worker ahead of you, barefoot, quick, and already annoyingly energetic for this time of morning, waves for you to follow. His pace is steady, not hurried, not lazy, just confident. The kind of confidence people get only from walking the same waterlogged paths every day of their life. You try to match him, but the damp soil keeps grabbing your sandals like it's trying to keep you here forever. Honestly, if this were your daily commute, you'd probably quit by Wednesday. The canal beside you is calm and glassy, reflecting the faint rising glow of the eastern sky. The light turns the water a pale jade, and every small ripple from passing canoes makes the reflection tremble like a nervous heartbeat. You move carefully, because one wrong step and you're doing an unplanned morning swim. And nothing ruins the quiet Aztec ambiance faster than your own splash screaming. Ahead, the chinampas stretch out in long, neat grids, floating gardens that somehow don't float. A mainstream historical fact drifts into your mind. Despite the name floating gardens, chinampas were actually fixed to the lake bed with woven stakes and roots, making them surprisingly stable. So no, they didn't drift away like leafy rafts. They just sat quietly in the water all year, like introverted islands minding their own business. But the magic wasn't the floating. The magic was how alive everything felt here. Even before full sunrise, the gardens hum softly with movement. Tiny insects rising and falling in gentle waves. Moist soil settling after irrigation. A heron stepping through the shallows with the sass of someone who owns the place. Everything is slow, rhythmic, peaceful. Like the whole landscape practices deep breathing as a lifestyle. You reach the first plot, and the young worker gestures proudly, inviting you to kneel. The soil is rich, black, soft, slightly warm from the decomposition underneath. He scoops up a handful and holds it toward you. You hesitate, because grabbing wet mud before breakfast feels like a questionable life choice, but you take it anyway. It's surprisingly light. Fluffy even, like the world's most environmentally friendly chocolate cake batter. He points to the edges of the plot where willow trees stand in a line, thin, tall, watchful. Their roots form living walls that grip the soil like giant fingers. A quirky tidbit rises. The Aztecs planted willows not just for stability, but because their roots grew into dense, interlocking cages that kept the garden from ever drifting away. They were basically nature's zip ties, strong, flexible, and requiring no maintenance. You look closer at one willow, noticing where the bark is marked with tiny diagonal cuts. The worker taps them gently. These cuts encourage new root growth in exactly the direction they want it to spread. It's like botanical hairstyling. And honestly, the tree seems into it. As you stand, a faint breeze moves across the water, carrying hints of moisture and the earthy sweetness of fresh vegetation. You smell life, plants, wet roots, a hint of morning flowers opening somewhere behind you. The air is thick with potential, the kind of air that feels like it could grow anything if you just whispered the right encouragement. Walking along the narrow boundary ledge, you try not to fall into the water while also pretending you look graceful. Spoiler, you don't. The worker pretends not to notice, which is the nicest thing anyone has done for you today. You pause when you spot a canoe approaching, a narrow wooden vessel gliding silently across the canal, pushed by a farmer using a long pole. He looks like he's drifting through a dreamscape. The water is so smooth that each push sends him forward in one long, unbroken glide. You imagine traveling like this to work today instead of dealing with traffic, honking cars, and that one cyclist who thinks stoplights are optional. Honestly, civilization peaked here. When the canoe reaches you, the man inside lifts a small basket and shows you the seedlings inside. Tiny, green, trembling just slightly in the morning air. Corn, squash, amaranth, chilies, life in its earliest form. He sets them down gently onto the chinampa edge, like placing little treasures into the world. His hands move with routine softness. There's no rush, no pressure, just steady care, one plant at a time. As you keep walking, you notice an older woman kneeling near the canal bank, smoothing fresh sediment pulled from the lake floor onto the chinampa surface. Her motions are slow and practiced. She hums under her breath, a soft, almost lullaby-like tune. The rhythm of her movements matches the rhythm of her voice. This is farming, yes, but it's also something gentler, something sacred. Historians still argue whether chinampa maintenance was considered a spiritual duty or simply daily labor. But watching her now, you suspect the boundary between those two worlds blurred a long time ago. She isn't just tending a garden. She's tending a living ecosystem, one that breathes with the city, feeds it, shapes it. Nearby, a child, maybe 5 years old, uses a small stick to draw lines in the dirt. Complex ones, rows and grids like miniature chinampas. You smile. Even toddlers here play pretend agriculture. Somewhere, a parent must be very proud. Just as you're settling into the peaceful rhythm of the place, a frog croaks loudly beside you, startling you so hard you nearly step backward into the canal. The worker tries not to laugh. You glare at the frog. The frog blinks at you slowly, judging your entire existence. Fair. You reach another chinampa and notice the water between the gardens shimmering with tiny fish and floating vegetation. Nutrients move back and forth through the system without anyone needing pumps or pipes. The whole place is so perfectly engineered that modern scientists still study chinampas to understand sustainable farming. But what surprises you is the stillness. For gardens built on water, they hardly move at all. The surface shivers sometimes, sure, but the islands? They sit with ancient patience, as if the lake holds them lovingly in place. Grounded, quiet, unbothered. And standing there, you realize why this place feels different. Everything here is alive, but nothing is rushed. You exhale, finally matching the slow breath of the chinampas themselves. The world softens around you. The light grows warmer, and as you step toward the next garden, the edges of the land blur into mist once more, pulling you deeper into the Aztec dawn. You step farther along the soft canal bank, the mist thinning around you like someone slowly lifting a silk curtain. The young worker ahead of you, barefoot, quick, and already annoyingly energetic for this time of morning, waves for you to follow. His pace is steady, not hurried, not lazy, just confident. The kind of confidence people get only from walking the same waterlogged paths every day of their life. You try to match him, but the damp soil keeps grabbing your sandals like it's trying to keep you here forever. Honestly, if this were your daily commute, you'd probably quit by Wednesday. The canal beside you is calm and glassy, reflecting the faint rising glow of the eastern sky. The light turns the water a pale jade, and every small ripple from passing canoes makes the reflection tremble like a nervous heartbeat. You move carefully, because one wrong step, and you're doing an unplanned morning swim, and nothing ruins the quiet Aztec ambiance faster than your own splash screaming. Ahead, the chinampas stretch out in long, neat grids, floating gardens that somehow don't float. A mainstream historical fact drifts into your mind. Despite the name floating gardens, chinampas were actually fixed to the lake bed with woven stakes and roots, making them surprisingly stable. So no, they didn't drift away like leafy rafts. They just sat quietly in the water all year, like introverted islands minding their own business. But the magic wasn't the floating. The magic was how alive everything felt here. Even before full sunrise, the gardens hum softly with movement. Tiny insects rising and falling in gentle waves. Moist soil settling after irrigation. A heron stepping through the shallows with the sass of someone who owns the place. Everything is slow, rhythmic, peaceful, like the whole landscape practices deep breathing as a lifestyle. You reach the first plot, and the young worker gestures proudly, inviting you to kneel. The soil is rich, black, soft, slightly warm from the decomposition underneath. He scoops up a handful and holds it toward you. You hesitate, because grabbing wet mud before breakfast feels like a questionable life choice. but you take it anyway. It's surprisingly light, fluffy even, like the world's most environmentally friendly chocolate cake batter. He points to the edges of the plot, where willow trees stand in a line, thin, tall, watchful. Their roots form living walls that grip the soil like giant fingers. A quirky tidbit rises. The Aztecs planted willows not just for stability, but because their roots grew into dense, interlocking cages that kept the garden from ever drifting away. They were basically nature's zip ties, strong, flexible, and requiring no maintenance. You look closer at one willow, noticing where the bark is marked with tiny diagonal cuts. The worker taps them gently. These cuts encourage new root growth in exactly the direction they want it to spread. It's like botanical hairstyling. And honestly, the tree seems into it. As you stand, a faint breeze moves across the water, carrying hints of moisture and the earthy sweetness of fresh vegetation. You smell life, plants, wet roots, a hint of morning flowers opening somewhere behind you. The air is thick with potential, the kind of air that feels like it could grow anything if you just whispered the right encouragement. Walking along the narrow boundary ledge, you try not to fall into the water while also pretending you look graceful. Spoiler, you don't. The worker pretends not to notice, which is the nicest thing anyone has done for you today. You pause when you spot a canoe approaching, a narrow wooden vessel gliding silently across the canal, pushed by a farmer using a long pole. He looks like he's drifting through a dreamscape. The water is so smooth that each push sends him forward in one long, unbroken glide. You imagine traveling like this to work today instead of dealing with traffic, honking cars, and that one cyclist who thinks stoplights are optional. Honestly, civilization peaked here. When the canoe reaches you, the man inside lifts a small basket and shows you the seedlings inside. Tiny, green, trembling just slightly in the morning air. Corn, squash, amaranth, chilies, life in its earliest form. He sets them down gently onto the chinampa edge, like placing little treasures into the world. His hands move with routine softness. There's no rush, no pressure, just steady care, one plant at a time. As you keep walking, you notice an older woman kneeling near the canal bank, smoothing fresh sediment pulled from the lake floor onto the chinampa surface. Her motions are slow and practiced. She hums under her breath, a soft, almost lullaby-like tune. The rhythm of her movements matches the rhythm of her voice. This is farming, yes, but it's also something gentler, something sacred. Historians still argue whether chinampa maintenance was considered a spiritual duty or simply daily labor. But watching her now, you suspect the boundary between those two worlds blurred a long time ago. She isn't just tending a garden. She's tending a living ecosystem, one that breathes with the city, feeds it, shapes it. Nearby, a child, maybe 5 years old, uses a small stick to draw lines in the dirt, complex ones, rows and grids like miniature chinampas. You smile. Even toddlers here play pretend agriculture. Somewhere, a parent must be very proud. Just as you're settling into the peaceful rhythm of the place, a frog croaks loudly beside you, startling you so hard you nearly step backward into the canal. The worker tries not to laugh. You glare at the frog. The frog blinks at you slowly, judging your entire existence. Fair. You reach another chinampa and notice the water between the gardens shimmering with tiny fish and floating vegetation. Nutrients move back and forth through the system without anyone needing pumps or pipes. The whole place is so perfectly engineered that modern scientists still study chinampas to to understand sustainable farming. But what surprises you is the stillness. For gardens built on water, they hardly move at all. The surface shivers sometimes, sure, but the islands, they sit with ancient patience, as if the lake holds them lovingly in place, grounded, quiet, unbothered. And standing there, you realize why this place feels different. Everything here is alive, but nothing is rushed. You exhale, finally matching the slow breath of the Chinampas themselves. The world softens around you, the light grows warmer, and as you step toward the next garden, the edges of the land blur into mist once more, pulling you deeper into the Aztec dawn. You kneel at the edge of the island, just as an elder gardener waves you closer. His hands already stained a deep earthy brown from hours of working the lake bed. He points toward the water with the kind of gentle authority someone earns only after building floating gardens for decades. You lean forward, expecting to see something dramatic, maybe mystical roots glowing underwater, or a hidden net of ancient engineering pipes. But all you see is mud. Thick, dark, slightly bubbling mud. You try not to look disappointed. The elder chuckles, a soft sound that blends with the lake's quiet lapping. Everything begins with this, he seems to say. And you realize, if you expected some glamorous Instagram-worthy agricultural moment, you're on the wrong lake. Chinampas were built not with spectacle, but with patience, layering, and stubbornness. 3 things the Aztecs had in abundance. You shift closer, letting your fingers skim the cool water. Beneath the surface, you can feel reeds, bundles of ahuejote branches lashed together in long rectangular frames. A mainstream historical fact clicks into place. Chinampas were not naturally floating islands, but human-crafted rafts anchored firmly into the shallow lake bed. The floating part was more poetic than literal. They barely moved, held steady by living trees whose roots gripped the lake floor like quietly determined anchors. The elder motions for you to grab a handful of lake mud. You obey, instantly regretting it, as the sludge oozes between your fingers like a pudding that has lost the will to live. He nods approvingly. This mud, nutrient-rich, almost absurdly fertile, was the backbone of every Chinampa foundation. The gardeners dredged it from the lake bottom, piled it onto woven reed mats, and repeated the process over and over until the platform rose above the waterline. You watch 2 younger workers paddling up in a canoe loaded with more reeds. They stack them on the shore, each bundle tied with simple fiber rope. The reeds smell faintly sweet, like wet straw warmed in sunlight. The workers move without speaking, communicating in subtle gestures, the way people do when they've done the same task 1,000 times. A quirky tidbit surfaces in your memory. Some colonial observers believed Chinampas literally floated freely and needed to be chased down after storms. That image, Aztec farmers sprinting after runaway islands, is admittedly delightful, but utterly false. You look again at the stout ahuejote trees surrounding you, their roots like braided fists gripping the earth. These islands weren't going anywhere unless someone came with a very determined axe. The elder leads you along the perimeter, showing you slender stakes driven deep into the lake bed. He taps one with his foot. It barely trembles. These stakes acted as ribs for the frame, guiding the shape of the growing platform and ensuring the muddy mass didn't slump back into the lake like a tired pancake. Layer by layer, mud was added, alternating with vegetation, water hyacinths, lake algae, decomposing reeds, to create a natural compost pile disguised as real estate. You pause to watch the layering process. A canoe pulls up, carrying a heap of water weeds freshly gathered from the lake's edges. The workers dump them onto the frame, spreading them like a mattress of soggy green feathers. Then another group paddles out to dredge more mud, scooping it up with wooden tools and slapping it onto the pile. The sound is rhythmic, soft, oddly soothing, kind of like if someone invented ASMR specifically for gardeners. A wind stirs, ruffling the surface of the lake and carrying with it the scent of wet earth and distant smoke. You inhale, feeling the air settle in your chest with a calm weight. Something about this slow construction process makes the world feel less frantic, like time itself has decided to chill out for a bit. Children run past you, carrying baskets of thin roots. One pauses to show you how the roots are woven into the reed frames like tiny vines stitching fabric. Living nails. The child might have said if this weren't a silent historical reenactment. The roots would grow downward, weaving themselves into the mud layers below, strengthening everything over months and years. You crouch beside a finished corner of the chinampa and touch the surface. It feels firm, surprisingly solid for something that technically began as a floating raft. The texture is uneven, soft in some places, dense in others, like a patchwork quilt made of soil. But then your curiosity pulls you toward a question scholars still debate today. Did different chinampa builders use standardized construction methods? Or did each family have its own secret recipe of reeds, mud, and root layering? You ask the elder with your eyes. He only shrugs. Judging by the proud individuality in each farmer's gestures, you suspect the real answer lies somewhere between there was tradition and everyone believed their grandma's technique was the correct one. A canoe glides past carrying long willow saplings. You notice workers planting them at the corners of new chinampas, ahuejote trees deliberately placed to grow into living anchors. Their roots will plunge deep, tying the island to the lake's bed and keeping the whole structure stable during storms. The trees sway gently in the wind, their reflections trembling in the water like soft green brush strokes. You follow the elder as he steps onto the half-finished chinampa. The surface holds his weight easily. You take a careful step, and the island barely moves. You try to shift your weight, expecting a wobble, but the chinampa stays steady. That's the point, after all, a floating garden that hardly floats at all. And as the morning sun rises, you watch the workers moving in a slow, practiced rhythm. Mud, reeds, roots, water weeds, more mud. Building land out of water, patience out of labor, and A to D future out of something as humble as lake bottoms. Somewhere behind you, a heron lifts off and drifts across the canal, its wings casting a brief shadow over the garden. The elder smiles faintly, as if nature itself has approved this new patch of earth. And you feel it, the beginning of understanding how a city once grew crops, not on land, but on water that didn't drift away. You glide deeper into the Chinampa district, the canoe bumping gently against water, so calm it feels like lacquered obsidian. The gardens around you seem almost still, but beneath their quiet surfaces beats the nervous, rhythmic pulse of an entire empire's food supply. You don't feel it immediately, not until you notice how enormous the city in the distance looks, shimmering above the lake like a floating mirage. And yet here, on these humble plots of mud and reeds, is where most of its meals are born. You shift slightly in the canoe and inhale a scent that's oddly comforting. Damp soil, cut reeds, and something warm and herbal drifting off a nearby chinampa. A farmer is already knee-deep in the shallow channel, lifting a scoop of thick lake mud called tlalti, the good stuff, the chocolate pudding of ancient Mesoamerica. You watch as he spreads it lovingly across a bed of plants. And for a moment, you wonder if you're witnessing Aztec self-care. Some people buy sheet masks. These people moisturize corn. A mainstream historical fact nudges forward. The Chinampas produced multiple harvests a year, far more than traditional dryland farming. The combination of rich mud, warm lake water, and nearly constant moisture meant crops grew fast, lush, and often ridiculously healthy. So healthy, in fact, that Tenochtitlan could support over 200,000 people, one of the largest cities on Earth at the time. It's a little humbling realizing this thriving metropolis depended on islands that weren't actually floating, just pretending to be. You lean closer as the farmer pats the mud into place, his hands moving with a sleepy rhythm you'd expect from someone folding warm laundry. The plants, squash, beans, chilies, amaranth, seem to know the drill. They sit politely in neat clusters, glowing a little in the rising sunlight, like they're showing off for visitors. A dragonfly buzzes by, doing a lazy figure 8, as if inspecting your work ethic. Then you notice something curious. The farmer keeps glancing at the water, not the plants. He taps it with a reed pole, listens, and nods to himself like he's reading a secret manual. You try to mimic the gesture. You tap the water. The lake, unbothered, taps nothing back. You decide perhaps it only speaks fluent Nahuatl. A younger farmer paddles up and unloads a basket of lake weeds, the vibrant green kind that looks suspiciously like the stuff your friend tries to make smoothies with. He explains, or rather, he gestures dramatically in a way you interpret as explanation, that these weeds, once composted, enrich the soil even more. It dawns on you that these people are recycling champions centuries before recycling was cool. And then comes the quirky tidbit of the day. Some Chinampa farmers believed that singing to the water helped ensure a better harvest. The melodies weren't prayers exactly. They were more like aquatic pep talks. You watch an elderly woman humming softly toward her plot while stirring the water with a paddle. The sound is low and soothing, like a grandmother coaxing soup to simmer correctly. Whether or not it changed the crops, it certainly makes your eyelids a little heavier. A fisherman passes by and leaves a bundle of small fish on the edge of a Chinampa. You blink. He's not delivering groceries, he's delivering fertilizer. Tiny fish, lake sediment, and floating vegetation all break down in the warm shallows, feeding the soil in ways modern farmers would envy. You suddenly understand why the plants look like they've been secretly taking vitamins. The city in the distance glows brighter with the sun, and you realize just how much pressure these quiet gardens carry. They supply vegetables, flowers, herbs, and even medicinal plants. You picture bustling Tenochtitlan, markets bursting with colors, temples towering over causeways, canals weaving through homes like watery streets, and all of it functioning smoothly because these Chinampas are constant, reliable, and stubbornly fertile. Yet scholars still argue whether the system was centralized imperial planning or a patchwork of family-run plots loosely tied into a bigger network. Watching these farmers now, each with their own rituals, methods, and tiny quirks, you suspect it was both. An ecosystem shaped not by one hand, but many. A farmer waves you over to step onto one of the Chinampas. You tread carefully, expecting wobble, but the ground is surprisingly solid, firm under your weight. You half expected to sink or see the island drift away like a rogue surfboard. Instead, it holds steady, anchored by willows and mud layers, the floating illusion only visible from afar. Rows of corn rise taller here, their stalks brushing your shoulder as you walk. You run your fingers across the leaves. They're cool, slick with dew, and alive with quiet energy. Every rustle feels like a tiny secret. Somewhere behind you, a woman tosses seeds into freshly turned soil with practiced flicks, each movement calm and precise. Another canoe arrives loaded with produce destined for the markets. Tomatoes in shades of orange and gold, squash striped like summer sunsets, herbs bundled neatly with reeds, and flowers so vibrant they look enchanted. The sheer abundance is almost overwhelming. It's like every plant read a motivational quote this morning and decided to overachieve. You sit on the Chinampa's edge, legs dangling over the water, and watch the process unfold around you. Mud applied, seeds sown, weeds collected, water monitored, canoes drifting quietly between the narrow channels. Everything moves slowly, intentionally, without hurry. And yet this stillness feeds a massive city, supports countless lives, and shapes an entire empire's daily rhythm. You breathe in the earthy scent again, deep, warm, calming. You can almost feel the Chinampa exhale with you. For a place that hardly moves, these gardens keep an entire world in motion. You drift along a narrow ribbon of water, just as the morning settles into something steadier, less golden, more cool blue, and the Chinampa farmers begin their quiet rituals of reading the lake. They don't rush, they don't chatter, they simply move with a kind of unhurried certainty, like people who have spent their entire lives listening to things most others never notice. And you, floating along in your imaginary canoe with the grace of a tourist who would 100% fall overboard if someone sneezed too close, try to keep up with their rhythm. One farmer kneels at the edge of his plot, dipping 2 fingers into the water. He closes his eyes. You mimic him because at this point, you've fully committed to the role of apprentice who definitely doesn't belong here. The water feels cool enough to make your skin tighten, but when he feels it, he gets actual information. A mainstream historical fact rises to mind. Chinampa farmers monitored water temperature and clarity to judge nutrient levels and circulation between the canals. If the water felt slightly warmer or silkier than usual, they knew algae blooms might be coming. If it felt colder, it might mean fresh mountain runoff was flowing in. You sensed nothing except wet. The farmer senses a whole biography. He rises and walks along the canal edge, occasionally scooping water into a small gourd. He swirls it, sniffs it, even lets a thin line trickle across the soil. You expect him to whisper, mmm, notes of pine and subtle undertones of lake slime, but he's actually checking how quickly the water absorbs. Chinampa soil was a living sponge, and the Aztecs had mastered the balance between overly soggy mud and soil just moist enough to support 3 crops at once. Another farmer leans on his paddle, watching the tiny ripples near the reeds. His gaze is so intense, you half expect him to see the future in them. Maybe he does. In this calm, slow world, ripples are messages. A slightly sharper ripple might hint that a breeze is shifting. A trembling ripple could mean a water bird disturbed something out of sight. A lazy ripple, barely existing, tells him the lake is steady, cooperative, ready for a day of planting. A quirky tidbit passes through your memory. Some Chinampa farmers claimed they could tell the health of their crops just by listening to the sound of water brushing against the roots beneath the soil. It sounds unbelievable until you notice how attentively they listen, heads cocked, bodies still as reeds in prayer. You try listening too. You hear water and a bird and possibly your own stomach. Still, the farmers seem pleased. One gestures toward a section of lakeweed drifting slowly toward the plots. He taps his paddle twice, signal enough for another farmer to collect it later. Lakeweed wasn't trash to them. It was fertilizer, insulation, reinforcement. Basically the Aztec version of a buy one get six free miracle material. You drift past a chinampa where a younger farmer crouches over the soil, pressing his palm flat against the surface. He leaves it there for a long time, long enough for you to wonder if he's fallen asleep with his hand glued to the earth. But no, he's feeling the warmth of the upper soil layer. Chinampa soil warmed quickly in the sun, but could dry too fast if you weren't paying attention. Moisture management was a full-body art. Historians still argue whether this near-mystical style of reading the water was formally taught or simply absorbed through childhood, the way you might learn to judge weather by smell or know instinctively when someone is about to steal your fries. Some scholars insist the Aztecs had structured water reading apprenticeships. Others believe it was a deeply personal skill, unique to each farmer, passed down in subtle gestures and long silences. But anyone watching them move would agree on one thing. They didn't check charts. They didn't measure data. They felt their environment the way you'd feel a friend's mood. A soft breeze rolls over the water, cool but not alarming, bending the willow leaves just slightly. Several farmers pause, not dramatically, just gently, like turning a page. Their eyes track the breeze across the lake, then down to the soil, then to the reeds. They're not looking for storms. They're looking for hints, small shifts in humidity, color, texture. You begin to understand why they could grow more food on these small islands than entire fields and solid land. One farmer tests the moisture at the root base of the crops by gently tugging a stalk. If it resists, the soil is too wet. If it slips too easily, the plot needs reinforcement. You tug one too, but all you get is a handful of mud and a polite, pitying stare. The farmer paddles closer, dips his hand into the canal, and lets water drip rhythmically onto the roots. It's a delicate, practiced pattern. Drip, pause, drip, wait, as if he's tapping out a secret code. And in a way, he is. Every gesture is a conversation between gardener and lake. You drift slowly beside him, listening to the plip, plip, plip of water on warm soil. It's hypnotic, almost musical. The air smells of wet earth, lake plants, and something green and sweet you can't quite name. Your eyelids get heavier. The world grows softer. And then, because the universe has a sense of humor, a frog leaps onto the edge of your canoe and stares at you like it's judging your life choices. The farmer nods approvingly. Frogs were seen as signs of healthy water. You consider nodding back at the frog just to stay on theme. A faint vibration moves through the soil as the wind changes direction, and every farmer seems to feel it at once. They tilt their heads, exchange tiny nods, and continue working seamlessly. You can't help thinking, this isn't farming. This is listening to the planet breathe. And you, drifting between chinampas under a softening sky, begin hearing the rhythms too? Not clearly, not confidently, but enough to sense the lake's quiet pulse beneath you. You breathe with it. You move with it. And slowly, quietly, you start to understand why these floating gardens hardly moved at all. You glide deeper into the chinampa maze just as the day begins its long, warm exhale. The sun lifts gently over the lake, and the farmers shift into a slower rhythm, the kind of rhythm that tells you this is about to be a very long day and an even longer night, because chinampa farming didn't end at sundown. Oh no, Welcome to night crops, lunar gardening, and the kind of quiet productivity that would put your late night snacking habits to shame. A farmer waves you closer, his canoe rocking only slightly as he adjusts a basket filled with fresh cut amaranth. His shoulders glow softly under the sunlight, but what he says, well, what he gestures, makes it clear he's preparing for the other shift. The moon shift. Chinampa fields didn't sleep, and neither did the farmers, not entirely. You follow him along the edge of his plot, where bundles of torches lie ready for lighting. Their resin-soaked ends smell sharp and earthy, waiting for sunset. The wood crackles faintly even before flame touches it, and you imagine how the night will look. Rows of tiny lights reflecting off the canals, flickering like constellations fallen into water. A mainstream historical fact settles into your mind. The Aztecs often worked their chinampas at night under torchlight or moonlight, especially during dry seasons when soil moisture needed constant monitoring. You raise a brow at the idea of farming in the dark. He raises a brow back, basically saying, "Yes, and we don't even trip?" The sun creeps higher, but tonight's preparations are already underway. Another farmer stoops to inspect a set of squash vines that grow best when handled after sunset. Their leaves wilt quickly in midday heat, so nighttime work is far gentler. You touch a leaf. It's cool, thick, and surprisingly velvety, like nature's version of a soft blanket. If plants could sigh in relief, these ones probably would. A quirky tidbit bubbles up. Some Chinampa farmers believed that moonlight made certain crops more obedient. Not magically, not dramatically, just a little more cooperative, as if the plants preferred the quiet. Modern logic says cooler temperatures reduce stress on roots and stems. But the farmers? They would smile knowingly and say, "The moon helps." As the afternoon softens, you watch them prepare tools for nighttime use. Small obsidian knives, sharpened, woven baskets, patched, ropes, coiled, gourds, filled with water. Even their canoes get adjusted. The torches need stable spots to attach, so the boats don't become floating fire hazards. You nod as if you absolutely could set up a stable floating torch system. You absolutely could not. Later, just before dusk, the lake air grows thicker, warmer, sweeter. You feel droplets of moisture forming on your skin. The farmers lift their faces to the sky, one long unified breath, checking humidity levels. This tells them whether the night crops will drink well or whether the soil will require extra water. Historians still argue whether Chinampa farmers learned night work through formal instruction or through generational intuition. Some researchers insist there were structured night cycles. Others believe families simply learned the timing of the moon, the lake, and the soil by living it. Whatever the truth is, watching them work feels like watching a secret choreography. The sun finally dips behind distant hills, and the lake sighs into soft blue. Torches ignite one by one. Thick gold flames dance atop the water's surface, reflecting like rippling ribbons. The air smells of burning resin, warm mud, and something faintly floral carried from nearby fields. A farmer hands you a torch, probably a huge mistake, but he does it anyway, trusting you to hold it upright and not set the empire on fire. You do your best. You follow the procession of flickering lights as they move between chinampas, shadows swaying with every paddle stroke. On your left, a family works quietly, pulling night beans that grow sweeter when harvested after dark. On your right, an old woman gently massages soil around young maize shoots. Yes, massages. because Chinampa farmers treated their crops with a kind of reverent tenderness that could make a plant feel emotionally supported. You kneel beside her and try to imitate her technique. Your version looks like someone trying to pet a cat that absolutely does not want to be pet. She laughs, waves you off, and keeps going, her hands moving in small circles that look like prayer motions. Another farmer checks floating markers placed earlier in the day, small bundles of reeds tied together. If they drift even a little, it means currents have shifted. But tonight they sit perfectly still, barely rippling, as if the lake has also decided to work the night shift. The moon rises slow and pale, its reflection long and trembling, like a silver road. The farmers adjust their torches, making sure the flames don't steal too much attention from the moonlight. Chinampa work relied more on silhouettes than illumination. Overly bright torches could disorient the eyes. You step carefully across a narrow dirt ridge. One wrong move, and you'll be in the canal, becoming a cautionary tale for generations. But the air is so quiet, the work so hypnotic, you almost forget to move at all. The night deepens, shadows blur. The rustle of leaves blends with torch crackles and soft paddles. The farmers move like slow, steady constellations drifting across the earth. You let the rhythm of their nighttime work pull you into its calm. The glow, the earth smell, the murmur of water, the moon resting gently on the lace-like gardens. Here, under the faint silver of night, you begin to understand. The Chinampas didn't simply grow food. They grew silence. They grew attention. They grew a kind of peace that carried an empire. Night fades slowly from the Chinampa world, not all at once, but in layers. First, the torches dim into sleepy embers. Then the moon slips behind a sheet of cloud. And finally, the lake exhales a soft gray light that signals dawn is somewhere nearby, stretching and yawning its way toward the horizon. You blink against the pale glow, still perched at the edge of a floating garden, legs tingling, clothes smelling like smoke and damp soil. Before you can even consider feeling tired, a quiet movement beside you catches your attention. A farmer kneels at the corner of his chinampa, pressing both palms into the cool earth. He stays like that for a long moment, eyes closed, breathing slow and steady. At first, you assume he's meditating, maybe regretting letting you hold a torch earlier. But then he whispers something so softly you can't tell if it's words or air. This is no break. This is ritual. A mainstream historical fact settles gently in your mind. The Aztecs incorporated religious and agricultural rituals directly into farming routines, especially in wetland zones like the Chinampas. Offerings to Tlaloc, the rain god, and to Chashutlik, the goddess of lakes and rivers, were considered essential to keeping these fragile water gardens thriving. These ceremonies weren't dramatic festivals. They were done quietly, daily, woven into the breathing of the land itself. The farmer opens his eyes, scoops up a small handful of wet mud, and places it carefully at the base of a young maize shoot. You think he's giving the plant a tiny mud hat. He is not. It's an offering, mud from the canal returned to the earth as thanks for last night's safe work. Another farmer arrives carrying a small clay bowl filled with crushed flowers. The scent is sweet, almost sugary, drifting lightly across the water. He sprinkles the petals around the chinampa's edges, letting them float on the surface like tiny drifting prayers. A quirky tidbit floats to mind. Some Aztec records describe farmers leaving miniature figurines, tiny frogs made of clay, hidden under their crops to encourage rainfall. You can't tell whether anyone here still does that, but you do spot a frog sculpture half buried in the mud, staring at you with what can only be described as amphibian judgment. As the farmers continue their quiet rituals, you notice the rhythm of the chinampas changing again. The birds begin chirping in the willow trees. Canoes shift gently as early traders prepare for their day. A woman dressed in simple woven cloth lights a small incense burner, wafting smoke across her squash plants. The scent is rich and earthy, like warmed pine needles mixed with lake mist. The farmers move with slow reverence, not rushing even though daylight is growing stronger. Every gesture, sprinkling water, smoothing soil, arranging reeds, is deliberate. These actions are not superstitions. They're agreements with the land. You watch one man dip his fingers into the canal and flick droplets in a precise pattern, murmuring something under his breath. A fisherman nearby echoes the rhythm, tapping the side of his canoe with 2 fingers. It's like a conversation written in water. Historians still argue whether these small rituals were strictly religious or half practical, half spiritual habits built from generations of observation. Some scholars insist the offerings helped maintain soil structure and moisture. Others argue the rituals were symbolic acknowledgments of the reliance on the lake gods. But when you watch these farmers work, bodies still glowing with torchlight memory, faces steady and calm, you realize the debate misses the point. For them, spirit and soil were the same sentence spoken in different languages. A young girl steps into view, carrying a reed basket filled with something wrapped in cloth. She kneels beside her family's chinampa and carefully unwraps the bundle. Inside sits a braided cord made of maize husks, decorated with bright bits of flower petals. She sets it gently at the edge of the plot. The gesture is small, almost shy, but her father nods in approval. This is her first offering, her first link in a chain that has stretched for centuries. You lean closer, curious, but the girl gives you a look that says, "Admire from a respectful distance, outsider." You comply. Moments later, an older woman approaches, holding a clay pot filled with water drawn from a deeper part of the canal. She pours a thin line around her chinampa, almost like outlining it in liquid light. You hear her hum a slow old tune. The melody is soft, uneven, almost like a lullaby meant for the earth instead of a child. The sound sits in your chest, warm and gentle. Around you, the rituals rise and fall like breathing. A man blows powdered maize into the air. Another uses a willow branch to brush water across the soil in feathery strokes. Someone leaves a piece of bread at the base of a reed bundle, an offering to the spirits believed to inhabit the marsh. You even spot a feather placed carefully in a crack between mud layers. The lake seems to watch all of this quietly. The water barely moves. Even the breeze waits its turn. Finally, the farmers stand and stretch. The light has strengthened. The mist pulls back like a curtain. The chinampas return to their steady, grounded hum. A young boy paddles by in a tiny canoe, so tiny it looks like a floating shoebox, carrying a bundle wrapped in cloth. You assume it's breakfast? It's not. He unties the cloth and reveals tiny clay figurines shaped like water drops. He tosses them into the canal one by one, giggling as they plop under the surface. You think he's just playing? The older woman beside him corrects you with a look. Those are offerings too. Even the children participate, especially the children. Each gesture connects them to the lake, the soil, the gods, the ancestors, the seasons, threads woven so tightly together that removing one would unravel everything. As sunlight finally brightens the gardens, you feel the truth settle into you quietly. The Chinampas survived not just because the Aztecs engineered them brilliantly. They survived because people loved them, spoke to them, fed them, and honored them with rituals as gentle as the morning light. The wet earth glows softly beneath your feet, and for the first time, you understand why these gardens hardly moved. They weren't floating, they were rooted in devotion. You push your canoe away from the larger channel and slip into a quiet, narrow waterway where the Chinampas close in tightly around you. The world shifts instantly. Sounds soften, the breeze slows, and everything feels closer, more secret. Here, the canals aren't just pathways. They're hallways between lives, carrying stray conversations, drifting scents, and tiny ripples that feel like someone whispering just out of view. You angle your paddle gently so you don't disturb the stillness too much. But even the faint swirl behind you pulls a few curious ducks to glance your way, as if they want to know what business you have in this tucked-away corridor. The water here runs smoother than glass, a perfect mirror that reflects willows arching overhead like long leafy arms trying to tuck the canal into bed. You hear voices, soft, casual, unguarded, floating from the Chinampas on either side. A woman is grinding maize, her rhythmic motions steady and patient. A man somewhere beyond her is tugging up stakes for transplanting bean vines. Children giggle as they chase dragonflies along a muddy edge, their bare feet slapping with that sticky, happy sound only wet earth can make. A mainstream historical fact unfurls in your mind. Chinampa canals doubled as neighborhood streets. People used them the same way modern villages use quiet back alleys, moving goods, visiting neighbors, staying updated on who was doing what. The official causeways of Tenochtitlan might have carried armies and traders, but these waterways carried everything else: birthdays, gossip, complaints, flirtations, rumors, and a whole ecosystem of everyday life. You drift along and immediately pick up the local news broadcast. A grandmother telling someone that a fisherman fell into the water again this morning. A teenager defending himself from accusations that he stole someone's chili peppers. He definitely did. And two farmers loudly arguing about whether or not the night's temperature will drop enough to threaten their squash vines. You smile. It's impossible not to. These canals feel alive in a way that the big, busy waterways never do. Here, every plot has a personality. Every family has its quirks. Every garden has its own story. But you also notice something subtler, something that feels woven into the flow itself. These canals are listening. The people who live along them speak softly, not because they're afraid, but because they respect the quiet. Sound carries too well. Privacy is a polite illusion here. A whispered comment can easily float half a mile. A sigh can be heard across 3 Chinampas. This is a world where everyone shares space, sometimes more closely than they intend. A quirky tidbit emerges as you pass a young boy holding a tiny reed flute. Some families believed the canals themselves enjoyed music. Yes, enjoyed it. And would behave better when treated kindly. Smooth water meant smooth work. Rippling water meant grumpy spirits. You're not sure whether he's serenading the canal or simply entertaining himself, but he plays a gentle, breathy tune anyway. The canal responds with perfect stillness. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe that little flute has supernatural customer service abilities. A pair of men paddle past you in the opposite direction, their canoe piled high with greens and herbs. They nod politely as they slip by, giving you just enough room to maneuver without brushing against the banks. As they pass, you hear one mutter to the other about a neighbor's dog that keeps stealing reed bundles. The second man insists it's actually a small water deity in disguise. The first man responds by splashing him slightly with the paddle. Scholars still argue whether such canal folklore was born from genuine belief or from the sheer boredom of repeating the same paddling routes every single day. When you turn into another narrow passageway, you catch sight of a simple wooden shrine tucked into the roots of a willow tree. Someone left 2 flowers and a pinch of amaranth beside it. You lean closer. The tiny figurine appears to represent a local water guardian, a household-level protector rather than a major deity. Offerings like these weren't state-mandated religion. They were personal, practical, sometimes charming ways families asked the earth and water to mind their crops, ease their burdens, and maybe keep the mosquitoes away for one night. Toward the middle of the canal, you pass a young couple seated at the edge of their chinampa, feet dangling into the water. They're murmuring to each other in low tones, laughing quietly as if trying not to disturb the garden behind them. You pretend not to hear because you are a polite time traveler, but you catch the words wedding and market dance, and suddenly the whole chinampa system feels like the world's most picturesque social network. No screens, just reeds, water, drifting words, and the occasional nosy duck. A little farther ahead, you pause as you hear a heated debate on your left. 2 older farmers are arguing over whose plot drains faster after heavy rain. One insists that his neighbor secretly carved a small trench to redirect water. The neighbor claims the lake spirits simply like him more. Their dispute is half serious, half comedic, and entirely communal. Everyone nearby is listening with the sort of mild entertainment normally reserved for morning radio talk shows. You glide on, letting each scene melt into the next. Every turn reveals a new micro-story. A mother chastising her son for losing a hoe, a fisherman timing the ripples to predict wind, a girl practicing her flower arrangements for tomorrow's market. You realize each canal carries dozens of overlapping moments, braided together like the reeds that edge the gardens. Then, as you drift into a broader connecting channel, you feel something shift. Not dramatic, not threatening, just a quiet awareness settling into your chest. You finally understand why these hidden canals mattered so much. They weren't just infrastructure. They were emotional geography. The place where people's private and public worlds mixed. The place where communities breathed together. And as your canoe glides on, the water mirror unbroken, you feel yourself becoming part of that quiet network. Drifting between the lives of strangers who somehow don't feel like strangers at all. You push off from the quiet Chinampa edge, just as the morning haze dissolves into a soft, golden shimmer over the lakes. The canoe rocks gently under your knees, as if it's greeting you back into the rhythm of the water. Ahead of you, a long line of other canoes is already forming, sleek silhouettes drifting in the same direction, their paddles slicing the surface with slow, practiced grace. These are the daily caravans bound for Tlatelolco, the beating economic heart of the Aztec world, and today you're joining them. Wedged between farmers carrying vegetables, fishermen hauling fresh catch, and flower growers balancing baskets overflowing with color. You dip your paddle into the cool lake, and the boat glides forward. The water is so clear in this early light, you can see reeds swaying beneath the surface, brushing the underside of the canoe like sleepy fingers. You're barely 10 minutes into the journey before you realize something. Despite the hustle, there's no shouting, no frantic rushing, no, "Hey, move your canoe, bro." The entire procession feels strangely calm, almost meditative. Even the guy transporting 3 crates of chilies, something that would definitely tempt fate if spilled, looks peaceful. A mainstream historical fact rises in your mind. Tlatelolco was one of the largest marketplaces in the entire pre-Columbian world, reportedly drawing tens of thousands of people on trading days. It wasn't just a spot for bartering food. It was a mega center of Aztec commerce, bustling with merchants, officials, gossip brokers, and everyday neighbors doing their shopping. Your canoe is basically the ancient equivalent of a delivery truck heading toward Manhattan at 8 a.m. Your arms settle into a slow, steady rhythm. Paddle, glide, paddle, glide. The farmer beside you gives an approving nod. Apparently, you're officially paddling at not embarrassing level. Up ahead, a canoe stacked with squash bumps lightly into your hull. The farmer offers a small grin, but doesn't apologize because, on these water routes, contact is normal. Soft nudges are just part of the choreography. You nudge him back because fairness. As the caravan lengthens, boats begin to sort themselves, not by force, but by silent agreement. Those carrying perishables drift forward. Those stacked with tools or reeds fall behind. Flower merchants cluster in the middle to protect their fragile bundles from splashes. No one announced this plan, but somehow everyone follows it. Even your canoe starts drifting automatically into the correct lane, like you've joined a school of very organized aquatic humans. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Aztec flower sellers were so respected that their canoes were often given extra space, not because the flowers were delicate, but because the sellers were believed to have particularly good luck. Some farmers joked that angering a flower merchant would make your next harvest jealous and underperform. You glance nervously at the bouquet beside you and offer it a respectful head tilt. The waterway widens as you approach the central canal. Now you can see the distant shape of Tlatelolco rising ahead, its long market roofs, its open squares, and the faint blur of thousands of people weaving between stalls. It's still too far to hear individual voices, but you can feel the hum of activity drifting through the air. Beside you, a fisherman coughs lightly and lifts a small shell horn to his lips. One short blast. Another canoe answers. A third replies. It's not random. This is lake communication. These little signals help the caravan merge without anyone capsizing or taking an unexpected swim. And honestly, it works better than the traffic system in half the modern cities you visited. Then the breeze shifts, warm, earthy, carrying a faint scent of roasted maize from the markets. The farmers sigh happily. The day will be good. Warm winds bring shoppers. Shoppers bring trade. Trade brings stories. And stories travel farther than any canoe. As you drift closer to the city, you notice tiny structures rising from the water, posts marking channel boundaries. Some tilt slightly, others stand perfectly straight. The man ahead taps one as he passes, a soft, ritualistic gesture, more habit than necessity. The canals have personalities, and some farmers treat them like old neighbors. Soon, the caravan enters a narrower passage framed by tall reeds. A checkerboard pattern of chinampas stretches on both sides, green rectangles filled with beans, maize, amaranth, chilies, and flowers. Every inch of land is alive, tended, purposeful, and every inch is watching the canoe lines converge toward Tlatelolco, like veins delivering lifeblood to a vital organ. Straight to the south gate today, one farmer murmurs, pointing with his paddle. Inspectors are checking weights again. Ah, yes, inspectors. Because of course the Aztecs would have quality control teams, a mainstream historical fact. Tlatelolco's marketplace was regulated by officials called poste cattle inspectors, who ensured fair trade, honest weights, and proper etiquette. If someone tried to cheat customers with bad scales, they could lose their stall. If the offense was big enough, they might lose a lot more than that. You tighten your grip on your canoe, suddenly very committed to ethical commerce. One fisherman snorts. Historians still argue whether the inspectors were strict because they cared about fairness or because they enjoyed being dramatic. Judging by the stiff way he imitates one adjusting imaginary glasses, you suspect it's the latter. Your canoe drifts around a gentle bend, and suddenly the world opens up. Tlatelolco spreads out before you, vast, noisy, sunlit. Hundreds of canoes pull up to the docks, unloading flowers, maize, beans, squash, herbs, woven mats, freshwater fish, lake algae, ducks, and baskets so pretty they deserve their own museum. You step out onto the dock, legs wobbly from the motion of the water. Around you, the air trembles with life. Traders shout, children laugh, vendors call prices, musicians drum in the distance. It's everything Kainampas were grown for. This pulse, this exchange, this swirling dance of food and people. Your canoe mates begin unloading. Squash thumps softly onto woven mats. Flowers burst into color as baskets open. Reed bundles fall with a whisper. This, you realize, is more than a marketplace. It's the daily expression of the floating garden's purpose. They feed the empire, not just with food, but with movement, connection, rhythm. And as you help lift a basket of tomatoes onto the dock, you feel it in your bones. Without these quiet canals, this legendary marketplace wouldn't exist. Without these floating gardens, Tlatelolco would starve. And without this canoe caravan, the city's heartbeat would falter. The Aztec world moved because its gardens hardly did. You step away from the noise of Tlatelolco's market and drift back toward the quiet canals, following a different group of canoes now. Smaller, slower, and clearly headed toward the Chinampas, not as traders, but as families returning home. Their boats sit low in the water, piled not with vegetables, but with baskets, tools, blankets, and the soft, everyday clutter of people who spend sunup to sundown in the gardens. You ease your paddle into the water and join them, comforted by the return to that gentle rhythm of glide. Pause. Glide again. The lake surface mirrors the late morning sky, pale blue streaked with thin white clouds that look as though someone smudged chalk across a board. The air is warmer now, carrying the faint scent of damp reeds and lake mud. One by one, the canoes break off into narrower channels, this one lined with young willows, that one bordered by clusters of yellow flowers, another disappearing between cornstalks taller than you. Each path feels like stepping quietly into someone's private memory. A woman in the canoe beside you offers a smile before turning back to her child, who is determined to lean over the edge and try to grab passing lily pads. The mother's warning voice has that universal tone every parent uses, a mix of "stop that right now" and "you are a danger to yourself." You laugh under your breath, relieved to see that even in the Aztec world, kids are just kids. A mainstream historical fact settles into place. Most Chinampas weren't owned by the state. They were family plots, passed down through generations like living heirlooms. And the knowledge that maintained them, how to weave reeds into foundations, how to read water depth by color alone, how to plant in 3 rotating cycles, was inherited just as carefully. You paddle slowly behind the family, realizing you're watching one more link in a chain that stretches back centuries. The woman steers her canoe toward a plot bordered by thick rows of ahuejote willows. At the end of the canal, a grandfather waits on the bank, leaning on a wooden pole. His hair is silver, his back slightly bent, but his eyes are sharp. When the canoe nudges the soil, he reaches down and lifts the little boy up, with practiced ease. The kid immediately wiggles free and sprints toward a patch of marigolds like he's been freed from years of captivity. You watch the grandfather shake his head affectionately. Then he glances toward you and gives a polite nod. It's the kind of nod that says, "Yes, you may observe our entire morning routine like a stray duck we've adopted." You nod back with equal seriousness. As the family unloads their baskets, you notice something small but meaningful. Each tool is stored in the same place every day. The hoe leans against the willow trunk. The reed scoop rests by the water. The bundle of seed packets sits under a small clay pot turned upside down to protect it from dew. Everything has memory. Everything returns to its home. The Chinampa isn't just a land. It's an extension of the family itself. A quirky tidbit arises when the grandfather crouches beside the water and murmurs something to it before dipping his fingers in. It's not quite prayer, not quite superstition, more like greeting an old friend. Some Aztec families spoke to their Chinampa plots as though the gardens were living elders with personalities. And given how much work these gardens required, maybe that level of emotional investment was justified. You paddle onward down a quieter canal, watching other Chinampa families go about their days. One plot has 3 siblings manually clearing weeds, flicking them into a basket, while arguing loudly about who works the least. Another plot hosts a group of women planting amaranth seeds in perfectly straight lines, their conversation a gentle waterfall of gossip and laughter. On a third, a teenage boy tends squash vines while attempting to flirt with someone in a passing canoe. It's going terribly. Life here is slow but full, ordinary but sacred. As you drift deeper into the Chinampa zone, you begin to understand why these floating gardens hardly moved. They weren't really floating in the way outsiders imagined. They were rooted, anchored, interwoven into people's lives both physically and emotionally. The willows held the soil held the crops held the families, and the families held the traditions, passing them to children who pass them to grandchildren who will pass them again. Historians still argue whether these inheritances were strictly regulated by local councils or more informally guided by household customs. But as you watch one family teach a toddler how to press mud between his fingers, and another show a girl how to tie a reed rope without snapping it, you suspect reality was softer than the records suggest. Maybe Chinampa inheritance wasn't about law. It was about belonging. Ahead, a young man kneels at the edge of his family plot, gently patting the soil around a row of tender bean sprouts. His motions are slow and patient, the kind of care people usually reserve for small animals or very expensive technology. He glances up at you with a shy grin as if to say, "These are my babies." You nod respectfully. Bean babies deserve acknowledgement. He points to one of the willows framing the plot. Its trunk is gnarled and thick, its roots gripping the water like a giant's fingers. "Great-grandfather planted that one," he says softly. "He said it would outlive all of us." You rest your paddle on your lap, letting your canoe drift. A quiet truth settles over you. These Chinampas endure because people endure. These gardens barely move because the families who care for them don't allow them to drift. Not physically, not culturally, not spiritually. As late afternoon light gathers, turning the lake surface into molten bronze, more families return from the market. Canoes cluster near docks. Laughter rises across the water. Smoke drifts from small cooking fires as evening meals begin. Children play tag along the narrow paths. Dogs bark. Farmers stretch their backs. elders settle into their favorite sitting spots. It's ordinary, completely ordinary, and yet beautiful. You watch the silver-haired grandfather from earlier lift the marigold-obsessed child onto his shoulders. The boy wraps his arms around the old man's forehead, giggling so hard he nearly topples both of them. The mother laughs. The father shakes his head and tries unsuccessfully to hide a smile. This small, warm, muddy, peaceful world is the real heart of the floating gardens, not the engineering, not the productivity, not the empire-scale agriculture textbooks rave about, but the people, the quiet inheritances, the gentle way each generation steps into the footprints of the last. And as your canoe drifts onward, weaving through a tapestry of families rooted to their gardens just as deeply as the willows themselves, you finally understand. These chinampas aren't floating. They're held by memory, by love, by time itself. You leave the peaceful family plots behind and paddle toward a broader stretch of water, where the chinampas open into long channels that catch more wind and more sunlight. The lake surface glitters like a sheet of brushed copper, rippling gently under a breeze that has just enough force to make you pull your cloak a little closer. Something feels different here, lighter, but also unsettled. And then you see why. Two farmers stand at the edge of a chinampa, hands on hips, staring intensely at the water level, as if it personally wronged them. One is muttering, the other shaking his head. Their canoe sits half-grounded in the mud, tilting at an angle that screams, "Today just isn't going our way." You glide closer, trying not to look too nosy, though, let's be honest, you are absolutely being nosy. The farmers mutter greetings, but don't break their concentration. One gestures toward the receding water line, marked clearly by a faint stripe of dark mud. "The lake is running low again," he says, "but only here, not over by the willows." His friend snorts. "That's what you think. Go 2 chinampas down and tell me it's not the same." A mainstream historical fact fits neatly into place. Lake Texcoco's water levels shifted constantly, influenced by seasonal rains, mountain runoff, and even mild earthquakes. The Aztecs became expert observers of small environmental changes because a difference of just a few inches could transform a thriving plot into a muddy headache. You look around the broader channel. Yes, the water here feels shallower, its color slightly cloudier. Reeds lean awkwardly, half submerged, as if debating whether to commit to water or land. Even your canoe drags more than before, the paddle catching silt with a soft scrape that sends tiny shivers through your wrists. One farmer crouches and scoops a handful of muddy water, letting it run slowly through his fingers. "Too thick?" he says. "You can smell the bottom rising." You lean in cautiously. He's right. The scent is stronger here, a mix of stirred sediment and fresh lake grass. The smell is not unpleasant, but it definitely says, "Something's shifting, friend." The farmers bicker in that familiar, affectionate way of coworkers who have argued about the exact same issue at least 60 times before. They point to the sky. They point to the distant mountains. They point to a confused duck swimming in circles like it forgot its own plan. Everything is a clue. Or nothing is. Hard to tell. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some Chinampa farmers believed that sudden drops in water level meant a lake spirit was rolling over in its sleep. According to these stories, the mud at the bottom rose when the spirit shifted, disturbing the balance. You almost want to lean over the side and whisper, "Sir, could you roll back the other way?" But you resist. Mostly, a little farther ahead, you encounter the opposite problem. Here, the water is too high. A Chinampa edge is visibly eroding, its reed supports bowing slightly outward. Two young workers are frantically reinforcing the border with fresh woven mats, tying them down with stakes hammered into the lakebed. Their splashes echo loudly against the willow trunks. One of them tosses you a weary smile. Storm runoff from the north. He calls out, came overnight. Again. His tone suggests this has happened one too many times this season. You paddle nearer and watch them work. Their movements are fast but careful, weaving reeds and mud in a precise pattern that looks simple but probably requires years to master. You notice how they avoid stepping too close to the soft edges. The soil here is newly loosened, eager to slide into the water with a single misstep. Historians still argue whether these shifting waters were caused mostly by climate cycles or by early hydraulic modifications made by the Aztecs themselves. The empire built dikes, canals, and floodgates, brilliant engineering systems that controlled the lakes, except when they didn't. And the lakes, being moody and unpredictable, often did whatever they wanted anyway. A third worker arrives carrying a bundle of green reeds over his shoulder. He drops them with a dramatic sigh that conveys the whole emotional arc of a man who has been fixing the same problem repeatedly. This is the 4th time this month, he mutters. At this rate, we'll have more borders than garden. You relate deeply to this energy. You continue paddling down the long channel. The Chinampas on either side stretch into distance, their borders forming neat right angles like a patchwork quilt. Birds circle overhead, white egrets flashing like moving brushstrokes against the sky. They land on the soft banks, stabbing at fish that drift into the flooded edges. Their presence is another sign. High water brings more small fish. Good for birds, maybe less good for farmers. As you glide under a leaning willow branch, a faint rumble reaches your ears. Thunder? No, it's too constant. More like distant applause. You rise slightly in your canoe and spot the cause. Water cascading down a man-made spillway near a dike farther down the canal. A group of engineers, yes, Aztec engineers, are adjusting a wooden gate, releasing excess water from one part of the lake into another. Their teamwork looks like a choreographed dance. Lift, brace, adjust, shout a command, then lift again. A farmer on a nearby Chinampa pauses his work and watches them. If they let too much through, he mutters darkly, we'll be swimming tonight. You give him a sympathetic nod. Water control is one of those things you never notice until it goes wrong. A theme consistent across all of human history, from the Aztecs to your modern plumbing. You steer your canoe closer to a patch where several farmers are gathered, their voices low and urgent. They're pointing to cracks forming in the soil on one Chinampa. You hop out and kneel, feeling the earth beneath your fingers. It's soft. Too soft. The cracks aren't from dryness. They're from shifting pressure below. One farmer touches the ground and closes her eyes. It's moving, she whispers. You blink. The garden? Moving? Well, not floating away, just adjusting, she replies. The water pulls one side, the roots resist. Everything finds a new balance. She smiles thinly. It's normal. Annoying, but normal. You step back, marveling at the quiet tension of it all. These gardens were stable, yes, but never perfectly still. They shifted like living things, breathing, settling, rising, sinking. It was a dance between water and earth, and the people had to keep up. By late afternoon, the winds pick up again, ruffling the lake into tiny waves. Farmers tighten ropes, children bring fresh reeds. Elders discuss whether the next rainfall will help or hinder. The entire Shinapa world exists in this delicate tension between too much water and too little, too calm and too wild, too still and too shifting. And you realize these gardens survived not because they resisted the lake, but because they adapted to its moods, its whims, its quiet warnings. You paddle onward, feeling the water deepen slightly again. The channel steadies, the winds calm, the gardens breathe. So do you. Everything settles into balance, at least for now. You drift along the canal, the morning sun warming your shoulders, when a sound you haven't heard before ripples across the water. A strange clatter of metal, the dull thud of unfamiliar boots, and the faint murmur of voices speaking a language that doesn't belong here. You slow the canoe. The farmers around you slow theirs too. Even the birds seem to pause mid-chirp, as if nature itself is bracing for something awkward. Then you see them, a handful of Spaniards, fresh off their boats, armor gleaming, helmets shaped like someone tried to forge a soup bowl into a fashion statement, are standing stiffly on the edge of a chinampa, staring at it like they've accidentally stepped onto another planet. The expressions on their faces are priceless. One man pokes the soil with the tip of his sword, as if testing whether the earth is actually real or some sort of elaborate Aztec illusion. Another kneels and dips his hand into the canal, squinting at the water like it personally owes him tax money. And the third just stands there, frowning so hard you're pretty sure his eyebrows are trying to file a complaint. This is the moment when the conquistadors encountered the Chinampas and had absolutely no idea what they were looking at. A mainstream historical fact floats into your mind. Early Spanish chroniclers described the Chinampa fields as floating gardens, convinced the plots drifted freely atop the lake like giant rafts. The truth, which you've now seen firsthand, is that these gardens hardly moved at all. They were anchored deep into the lake bed with layers of mud and reinforced with willow trees, turning them into some of the most stable farmland in the world. But the Spaniards? Oh, they were bewildered. One of them steps cautiously toward a row of willows lining the edge of the garden. He touches the trunk, glances at the farmer nearby, then back at the tree again. You can almost hear the gears grinding in his head. If this is floating, how is the tree doing that? The Aztec farmer just stares at him, utterly unimpressed. You can't blame him. The Spaniards shuffle forward, trying to walk across the plot, and immediately sink half an inch into the damp, fertile soil. One yelps, thinking he's falling through. The others scramble back like startled ducks. You cover your mouth to keep from laughing out loud. If this were a comedy sketch, you'd call it Europeans Try Agriculture. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some Spaniards were reportedly so confused by the Chinampa system that they believed it to be a form of sorcery. Lake magic used to conjure fertile land from nowhere. To be fair, if you show anyone a perfectly functional floating garden system in 1519, they might assume sorcery too. The lead Spaniard eventually musters enough courage to take another step forward. This time, he manages to stay upright, though he still looks as comfortable as someone trying to balance on a mattress made of pudding. He calls out to his companions, pointing toward the neat grid of plots stretching across the lake. To their eyes, it must look surreal. Fields that rise out of water, straight lines of crops surrounded by shimmering canals, farmers bending calmly over their work as if nothing is strange about gardens that appear to hover. Historians still argue whether the conquistadors' confusion stemmed from genuine misunderstanding, cultural bias, or the fact that some of them were, frankly, not the brightest torches in the fortress. But you're watching it unfold, and honestly, it's probably all three. A small canoe glides up beside you. The farmer paddling it whispers something under his breath that you don't fully catch, but you're 90% sure it's the Nahuatl equivalent of "Who invited these people?" He rows past the baffled newcomers with the air of someone who has errands to run and zero energy for nonsense. On one chinampa, an elder continues harvesting amaranth calmly, ignoring the armored men stomping around like lost cattle. He pauses only to adjust his straw hat. The Spaniards stare at him as if expecting him to deliver a speech, or at least acknowledge their presence. He does not. He harvests one leaf at a time, patient as the earth itself. You drift past the edge of the scene and watch from a shaded canal as the Spaniards attempt to understand what they're witnessing. They whisper among themselves, gesturing wildly at the grid-like layout, the canals weaving like threads between the plots, the vibrant corn, squash, beans, and chilies thriving with almost suspicious health. One Spaniard leans down and grabs a handful of mud. Holding it up to the light, he lets it fall slowly between his fingers. "This shouldn't work," he mutters, bewildered. You want to tell him that this mud is some of the most fertile agricultural soil ever engineered by humans. But you don't. You just drift quietly, letting him figure it out. Or not. Another Spaniard notices a canoe approaching loaded with flowers, vegetables, and a small basket of herbs. The canoe glides effortlessly between the plots, guided by someone who's clearly been navigating these waters since before he could walk. The Spaniard looks from the boat to the garden, back to the canal, then to the massive city of Tenochtitlan shimmering in the distance. You can almost see the realization hit him. This entire empire runs on these gardens, and he has no idea how any of it works. The farmers keep working, unbothered. The Spaniards keep staring, confused. You keep drifting, caught between two worlds, one grounded in centuries of agricultural knowledge, the other stumbling through it like travelers holding the wrong map. Eventually, a breeze stirs the willows. The lake ripples softly. The Spaniards step back, armor clanking, minds spinning, and you glide onward, leaving them behind as baffled shapes against the shimmering green fields. The chinampas, as always, remain steady. You drift farther down the canal, letting the canoe glide on its own as the lively hum of the chinampas softens behind you. The air feels heavier now, not in a dramatic, storm-incoming way, but in the quiet way a room feels when someone has already left it. You push past a small bend, expecting more shimmering gardens, bright plants, and the usual chorus of water birds. But instead, the canal widens into a place where everything looks just a little tired. The chinampas here haven't disappeared, not fully. They're just fading. Plants grow patchier. The willows seem thinner, as if shrugging under a weight they weren't built for. The once neat lines of crops curve awkwardly, collapsing into each other like pages of a book swelling from moisture. The water itself looks murkier, carrying bits of drifting reeds and debris that don't belong. You paddle gently, feeling an ache settle into your chest. These gardens used to feed empires. Now they're trying simply to survive. A mainstream historical fact floats to the surface. After the Spanish conquest, the Aztec lake systems, especially around Lake Texcoco, were drastically altered. Colonial administrators wanted solid, dry land, not water-based agriculture. Over the decades, they drained huge sections of the lakes to make room for European-style farms and urban expansion. The very environmental structure that made Chinampas possible began to collapse. And when the water goes, the gardens go. You shift your weight, the canoe rocking softly beneath you, and glide past a Chinampa where a single farmer tends a narrow row of struggling maize. No bustling family, no busy canoes. Just one man, shoulders hunched, pushing a hoe through cracked earth that once stayed moist year-round. He looks up briefly, nods, and then returns to his work like someone trying to save something too big to hold alone. On the next plot, the willows, the anchors of the entire system, lean at odd angles. Their roots stretch for water that no longer reaches them. A few branches droop low enough to touch the canal, brushing the surface with a sound like a tired sigh. You pass under one of those branches and feel its leaves trail across your shoulder. The whole tree trembles with the motion, shedding a few yellow leaves that drift like slow-motion snow onto the water. A strange pang hits you. Once, these trees strengthened the gardens. Now, they're becoming symbols of what was lost. A canoe approaches from the opposite direction, rowed by an older woman with the posture of someone who's carried generations on her back. In her boat sits only a single basket, small, half full of herbs and a few wilted flowers. She glides past you quietly, offering a nod as gentle as the ripples behind her. You watch her disappear around the bend and wonder how much longer she'll be able to harvest anything at all. Then you notice something else. The water level itself. It's lower than it should be, exposing parts of the Chinampa foundations, layers of old reeds, mud, and roots stacked like pages in a forgotten manuscript. You can actually see the structure now, the parts meant to stay hidden underwater. It's like seeing a stage with the curtains pulled back too far, revealing the ropes and beams that help the illusion work. And that illusion, of floating gardens, of eternal abundance, has begun to unravel. A quirky tidbit drifts into view as if summoned by the canal breeze. During early colonial years, some Spaniards attempted to convert Chinampas into European-style estates. They tried growing wheat, grazing sheep, even planting vineyards on islands engineered specifically for watery environments. The results were, let's say, educational. The sheep kept sinking, the wheat drowned, the grapes sulked. Historians still argue whether these failures happened because colonists misunderstood the ecological system or because they stubbornly refused to care about indigenous expertise. Watching the landscape now, you suspect it was both. You paddle onward, the silence thickening. Gone are the bright shouts of merchants. Gone are the children racing canoes between plots. Gone are the farmers singing as they harvest squash blossoms. You drift through what feels like a memory of a place. Still beautiful, still alive in parts, but undeniably slipping. At one particularly wide canal crossing, you find a half-collapsed Chinampa. The willows holding it together have toppled sideways, their roots ripping out chunks of soil. Earth slumps into the water in slow, muddy folds. A single wooden tool, a hoe, lies abandoned at the edge, half submerged, as if its owner simply couldn't bear to return for it. You sit there for a moment, letting the canoe rock gently. The sinking soil makes soft plopping noises as it settles deeper into the canal, like the last breaths of something that fought long and hard. Further ahead, you turn once more into a wider lake inlet, and here the transformation is complete. The water stretches almost uninterrupted, a mirror without islands. In the distance, horses trample along a newly carved path, their riders wearing broad hats and carrying tools meant for clearing more land. Wooden stakes mark future drainage lines, the sound of metal on earth carries across the water, steady, invasive, final. Beyond them, a cluster of colonial buildings rises where fertile chinampas once lay. Walls of stone, red-tiled roofs, straight streets carved through a place that once curved organically alongside living water. The change feels jarring, as if someone painted over a masterpiece with a ruler and gray paint. You drift closer to the edge, where a few last chinampa farmers have gathered. They speak quietly, their words heavy with uncertainty. One elder gestures at the disappearing lake, shaking his head. Another mutters that the soil is drying too quickly. A third closes his eyes and murmurs a prayer under his breath. You don't need to understand the language to understand the meaning. Everything is changing too fast. When you push onward, your canoe slides into a narrow canal that seems almost forgotten. Here, miraculously, a small cluster of chinampas still thrives. The willows are green, the earth is rich, flower beds spill color. A pair of herons stalk fish along the bank, elegant and unbothered. For a moment, you feel like you've stepped back into earlier chapters of this journey. But even here, the waterline is lower. Even here, the edges crumble slightly. You can feel the fragility. You pause your paddle and sit in the stillness. This wasn't just farmland. It was identity. It was architecture. It was memory. It was the lifeblood of an empire. And now, piece by piece, it is fading. You close your eyes briefly, listening to the soft lap of water against the canoe. When you open them again, the sun is sinking low, casting warm gold across the shrinking canals. The world looks beautiful, but tired. You take a slow breath, steady yourself, and begin paddling toward the final stretch of the story. You glide slowly into the last stretch of water, a place where the day is exhaling its final breath. The sky fades into a soft gradient of peach and lavender, and the lake reflects it like a tired mirror, one that remembers every color it has ever held. You rest your paddle across your lap and let the canoe drift, carried by a faint current so gentle, it feels like someone nudging you forward with a fingertip. The chinampas ahead are scattered, faint, half hidden by reeds and quiet shadows. Not gone, not alive the way they once were. Just holding on, like memories that refuse to let themselves be forgotten. You steer toward the nearest strip of land, where a row of willows still stands. They're older than they look, gnarled, thick. Their roots knotted like the fingers of elders who have seen too much but keep standing anyway. Their branches sway lightly in the evening air, brushing the water with a whispering sound, the same soft shh that parents use to soothe restless children. Maybe the land itself still wants to be soothed. A mainstream historical fact rises quietly in your mind. Chinampas didn't vanish entirely after the fall of the Aztec Empire. In pockets like Xochimilco, parts of the system survived, protected by farmers who refused to abandon the ways of their ancestors. Modern scientists consider them among the most efficient sustainable agricultural systems ever invented. And here you are, floating through the living remains of that brilliance. A canoe glides toward you from between two chinampas. It's rowed by a young man, maybe 30, maybe younger, wearing simple work clothes and a relaxed expression that fits the evening light. In the front of his boat sits a crate of leafy greens, freshly cut and still damp with canal water. He nods when he passes, and you notice how practiced his movements are, how he maneuvers the boat with the same ease you've seen in every farmer across centuries. He is part of a lineage that never broke. You drift behind him, letting him lead the way through a narrow canal lined with flowering plants. The petals glow softly in the low light, their colors blurred by dusk into dreamy smudges. You can almost imagine the bustling days of the empire. Children laughing, merchants shouting prices, farmers chanting to keep rhythm as they harvested. The echoes feel close enough to touch. On the next plot, an older woman works quietly alongside a younger girl, mother and daughter maybe. They kneel together, planting herbs in small clusters. The older woman hums something soft, a tune that floats across the water like a lullaby meant for the land itself. The girl imitates her motions with careful attention, as if learning a ritual with more meaning than simple farming. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some modern Chinampa farmers still bury offerings, small seeds, flowers, shells, at the corners of their plots, just as their ancestors did, as a way to wake the earth each season. No fanfare, no ceremony, just a gentle nod to old spirits who still feel present in the wet soil. Historians still argue whether these modern rituals are direct continuations of ancient traditions or inspired recreations shaped by memory and pride. Watching this family, you suspect the question doesn't matter. What lives is what is cared for. You paddle onward. The canal widens again, revealing a broad, quiet expanse. Here, a few Chinampas stand tall and green, others slouch into the water, half claimed by reeds. Birds skim low over the surface, tracing arcs that remind you of the traders who once paddled the same routes at dawn, carrying chilies, flowers, and fresh vegetables to Tlatelolco's massive market. You try to picture that world, a city of shimmering stone rising from a lake, surrounded by thousands of floating gardens that didn't truly float, but seemed to anyway. A world where water meant life, structure, identity, and connection. A world that engineered abundance out of mud and patience. Now, as the sun sinks deeper, the remaining Chinampas look like tiny lanterns in a vast room, each one holding a little flame of memory. You pause again to take it in. This place is quieter than the empire ever was, quieter than even the colonial years, quieter than moments earlier in your journey. But it is not empty. The quiet feels intentional, like the gardens want you to listen more carefully. So you do. You hear water lapping against roots. You hear distant laughter from another canal. You hear a bird settling into its nest. You hear the soft creak of your own canoe adjusting to your breath. And beneath all of that, you hear something else, something faint, a reminder that the past does not leave. It settles, it shifts its weight, it changes shape, but it stays. You paddle toward the edge of the Chinampa zone, where the canals narrow into the outskirts of modern life. In the far distance, you can hear the faint hum of a city, not the ancient capital, but the modern one, sprawling and loud and complicated. And yet, between you and that hum lies this pocket of old water, still resisting, still offering, still growing. When you reach the last turn, the lake opens into a reflective pool that catches the full sweep of twilight colors. The water barely moves, as if holding its breath. The Chinampas scattered across it glow with a softness that makes you feel like you're looking at a dream the earth refuses to forget. You rest your paddle one last time. The gardens hardly moved for centuries. The people who built them did. Empires rose, fell, collided, reformed. But these islands stayed steady, quiet, patient, and some part of them still does. You take a final slow breath, letting the cool evening air settle into your chest. The water around you feels like a closing storybook, not shutting abruptly, but easing closed on its own, page by page, ripple by ripple. You turn your canoe gently, Begin drifting toward the darkening horizon and feel the weight of everything you've learned settle into a warm, steady calm. The Chinampas aren't gone. They're waiting. Still waters remembering everything. The water grows darker now, not with danger, but with the kind of darkness that feels like a blanket gently being pulled over the world. The last of the color drains from the sky in slow strokes, leaving only a muted glow along the horizon, just enough to outline the willows, the canals, and the quiet shapes of the Chinampas settling into night. You drift without paddling, letting the stillness guide you. Every sound feels farther away, softened as if wrapped in layers of calm. Even the birds have lowered their voices. Even the breeze has decided it's said enough for today. Your breath naturally begins to slow, matching the rhythm of the water's faint movements. Inhale, the scent of damp earth and cool reeds. Exhale, the soft memory of everything you wandered through tonight. The Chinampas become silhouettes, gentle, steady, unhurried. They've lived entire centuries like this, half earth, half water, fully patient. And as you float beside them, that patience starts to seep into you. Your shoulders relax a little, your jaw loosens, your thoughts quiet down to a low, warm murmur. The lake seems to hum beneath you, a long, low vibration, almost too quiet to notice. It feels like the land itself whispering that it's okay to rest now, that whatever you carried into this journey can wait until morning, that the night is not here to judge you, only to hold you. You watch the faint reflection of the first stars tremble on the surface. They make no demands. They simply appear one by one, steady as old friends. The canoe drifts, the gardens breathe around you, and your eyelids grow heavier with each slow heartbeat. Let the still waters cradle you. Let the memory of ancient gardens settle your mind. Let yourself slip gently into rest.